So today we're talking about police and structural ableism. Jane?
What do we mean by police? Sort of a defining of terms at the beginning. When we say police, we are referring to the modern institution of law enforcement within the United States. Other nations may share the same primary characteristics and therefore may be afforded the same criticisms. The institution can be most simply defined as an organization that enforces the law of the state. We will elaborate on this definition later in the presentation. But to be clear, like by this definition, this fundamental definition basically applies to like every country right now. So yeah.
This is a statistic from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it essentially says that disabled people make up 1/3 to 1/2 of all people killed by law enforcement and experience twice the rate of violence that others do. And you can see on the chart on the left that they've measured this over time, and there's been significant evidence that this is a consistent trait, is that people with disabilities are more often impacted by law enforcement agencies. People with cognitive disabilities had the highest rate of total violent crime victimization, almost 1 out of 100. It's a pretty significant number.
So intersectionality. I just want to sort of get this one out of the way first so that we view the rest of this presentation with this lens. Disability intersects with race to increase the risk of violence and highlights case studies involving African American and Indigenous disabled people. So basically, physical disability, mental illness, mental disability, neurodivergence, class and economic status, race and ethnicity, all can increase the chances of being a target for police brutality. And those at intersections being of even higher risk. So the more of those you have, the more of these sort of structural issues, the more that you're at risk for these things. So fixing issues within the justice system will only work if it uplifts all of these at-risk communities. We can't just help one. They all go together because a lot of people are a lot of these. And they're very interconnected, intertwined for a lot of people. So it has to go all together. You have to think about it as a large thing. Kat or Jaden, did either of you want to take this one? Okay, yeah, go for it.
So there is, in statistics, whenever they're listing crimes with involving police officers, police brutality, things like that, disability is generally unmentioned or listed without context, and it's usually listed for pity or sympathy for the victim, and often is used to blame them for their death. So you might see a news article talking about someone who has died by the hands of police, and it mentions their disability in a way that implies that that is something that gave the officer some reason to enact in a situation. And this happens way too frequently. Is the frivolous tossing around of, oh, well, they had a disability, oh, they had a mental health problem, and therefore it is more reasonable for them to have been killed or something like that. It's very harmful.
Yeah. I just want to reiterate what David said. Yeah. You guys have seen the news. You guys have heard people talk about this, being like, oh, like they'll say, oh, this person was, this police brutality event happened. And then someone will be like, oh, but we found out this person actually had this and this and this, especially things like schizophrenia, and a lot of similar mental illnesses will be especially targeted for these things. So, you've heard family, coworkers, friends sort of parrot the same idea. One, I just want to, this is where we're doing discussions in the middle of this one, just because it's so big and so kind of heavy. So if anyone wanted to talk about it, how do we combat this? How do we combat both the media and, how our friends and our families and our loved ones talk about it? And also, how can we combat, both the media and people discussing it, just, socially? This is open to anyone who wants to talk. Or if you have any personal experiences with this.
Well, I definitely have had experiences where I have tried to talk to like an example was I knew someone who was suicidal and experiencing extreme paranoia and psychosis, and I wanted their roommates and RA to check on them without the police being called, because I knew that could endanger them, and the police still were called. And that was really a frustrating experience for the RA to have called the police when it wasn't necessary for them to be there, and it could have put that person in danger. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna discuss that later, because we also have a lot of thoughts on that. But yeah, thank you. I'll say personally, I think a lot of the issue with this is, one, the stigmatization of a bunch of these mental illnesses as is a huge beast of that would be a own meeting in itself. That people really feed into. Personally, whenever I hear this, I like to, especially if it's someone I know well, talk about that, be like, was that really an excuse to do this thing to them? Just because they had this one mental illness, that doesn't mean that they deserve to be shot. Some of it, could maybe be trainings or that sort of thing. But, for one, I think just talking to your friends and families who parrot these ideas, discussing, hey, I don't really think that that's a valid reason for this and this and this. The media is more of an issue because it's going to make a better headline. But I think, keeping people accountable for these sorts of headlines might also help as well.
One thing that I think might, and I agree with you, I think that you definitely need to be talking to your family members, to the people who you feel like are available to be talked to. If you're talking to someone who is so stubborn in their ways that they're just going to fight you, they aren't looking for productive conversation. But for people who are speaking these things unknowingly, or are they unaware of the issues with what they're saying, this is definitely something that you can have this conversation with someone about. In terms of how we combat this, I think a lot of it has to do with our advocacy for mental health knowledge in general, and that's kind of the thing that this club is going after, is trying to spread awareness and spread knowledge of what mental health and mental illnesses and mental disorders actually are, so that you don't have these negative rhetorics in the media.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have any other notes they'd like to add, or are we good to go to the next one?
So data is hard to find on police and autism because most of the police documents are not completely fully released. However, we do have a lot of information on mental health in general, and we know that autistic people are in the group of people with mental disabilities and are therefore more likely to be affected by police brutality, beaten, killed, etc., things like that. Some of this can be attributed to various behaviors that could be considered autistic. Some things like sensory overload can be very stressful for individuals, and they stop being able to speak properly. They won't be able to respond in the way that the police officer would like them to, and so they are going to be treated as someone who is resisting arrest or something along those lines. They might have trouble speaking in social situations. They might be too overwhelmed to get the words out of their mouth, and again be assumed to be a resisting arrest or something like that. And there are other things like hand flapping and things that can be seen as an aggressive move or a aggressive moment that that is something that a police officer could interpret badly if they are untrained in mental disorders, mental health, and things like that. It's just none of these things are reasons to even start to treat someone differently just because, or hurt or kill anyone. But these are just some of the things that you see in the media and you see happening in life that are impacted by this.
I would like to add on to this one. While I was sort of doing research for this, it was kind of startling and upsetting to see, because there's a lot of data. The more actual data they had was on people's worries about the police, and it was significantly higher with people with autism. They were just especially worried, especially like parents of autistic people were worried about like their kids, as well as autistic adults being worried for themselves, and that is not a fear that people should have to walk around carrying.
I definitely, I know people, or I know person. I say people. I know someone who is very, very much has a hard time speaking in public situations and has practiced like essentially a script to for if they ever get pulled over for whatever reason, so that they are mentally prepared and able to recite this whenever an officer comes up to them. And I think that is, in the short term, a good method to keep yourself safe as neurodivergent individuals, and I think it's something that might be good advice to share with friends, but that shouldn't be what we have to do.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add on specifically police and autism?
And feel free to, if you're uncomfortable just speaking up, you can always send a question in the voice channel, or you can raise your hand in the voice channel and then speak. It's up to you.
Also, if you're still thinking, we're going to have a larger discussion place at the very end of this presentation, so you can also hold on to it if you have something. Okay. So let's talk about this is sort of, I don't remember who was speaking, but how police respond to mental health. It's a really big issue. Should we send police out to do mental health emergencies? This is a quote from a USA Today article. In 2015, the Washington Post began a tally of officer-involved shooting deaths. In the first year, more than 25% of people who were shot and killed by police officers were experiencing problems with mental illness. A study by the Treatment Advocacy Center found that individuals with untreated mental illness were 6 times more likely to be killed by police. Since 2015, law enforcement officers have fatally shot more than 1,300 people with mental illness. And in this same line, suicide is currently labeled as a crime. And why it is so that people can go into specifically police officers, can go into the places without a warrant to supposedly help the person. However, this can also end up far more stressful of a situation. And I know probably you guys have heard some of the stories of someone going in for a mental health check or going out to one of these sorts of calls and ending up shooting the person, and things like that. Especially for people of color, this is an even bigger worry that just is already a stressful time in their life. Is this making this worse? Should we be sending out other people to do these things? What is the solution to this?
I've been thinking about these statistics, and it it really just it gets me angry. This whole topic gets me mad whenever I think about it, and whenever I was working on this presentation. And I think whenever you have something like a suicide crisis being handled by a person who is trained to protect against violent crime or something like that, like they're going to handle it poorly. I had a friend go through something where they needed the police to be called on them, or they needed someone to be called on them, and the police was really the only option. And whenever they showed up at the door, uh, sh- uh, whenever they showed up at the door, they just ridiculed her for having the thought, for having the inclination to be doing this. They called her selfish, and then left. And then I had to call them again 2 months later, or 2 hours later, to uh, because, and I guess unless it's actually happening, it's just going to be overlooked by people who aren't trained in this area.
Yeah, especially I think, some people will see that and hear that and call for more training, you know, but I don't think that's necessarily the solution. Because I think, on one hand, all the other training that police officers get is very much of the opposite sort of vibe. And in addition to that, the people who are wanting to become police officers are normally not doing it for helping out people with mental health crises. And I think this needs to be handled by someone else and someone a little less armed, because these are sort of not those issues. And I will address the when you're talking about the RA having to. Oh, did someone raise their hand? Oh, Jane, go for it.
You can, or you can go ahead and say what you're gonna say, Ron. I just had my
Oh.
mic off already, just so whenever.
I was just gonna say, because I used to be an RA, and the problem with that some of the stuff is, it's also in the university policy. Like, if you don't do that sort of thing, you are now like very liable, like your job's liable, possible like court kind of stuff liable. And that's an issue in itself, some of those choices you don't necessarily get to make, because of the whole system behind it, like the whole structural, this is what's expected, this is your only option for this sort of thing. Okay, yeah, go for it, Jaden.
Yeah, I think we'll get into this like later in the presentation as well, but I think, part of the solution isn't just to train like more officers to better deal with the situation. It's that this situation is just, like you said, something that officers don't really need to be responding to, and generally, like, I just agree with what you said.
Does anyone else
just said it
want
first.
to add in anything? Okay, and again, if you have thoughts on this, we can discuss them later, and you can also drop things in voice chat anytime. Prison and ADHD. This is a weird statistic that a lot of people don't know about. I looked at several different studies. They had kind of different answers, but studies put the prison population with ADHD anywhere from 25% to 40% of the prison population. And the general population is about 5 to 10%. I think it's like 10% for kids and like 5% for like adults, which is kind of weird and not really today's topic, but that's, I don't know if you guys can notice, significantly higher. So it's definitely like that group is a group that ends up in prison more often for a lot of reasons. So one, it does come with a lot of ADHD, does come with impulsivity, and also increased chances of addiction, which can often land you in a prison, which is also, that's a different discussion. Also not right. Also, difficulty in school and social life, as well as difficulty in keeping jobs because of executive dysfunction, issues with time management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, can also help lead to being in these sorts of populations. But also, it's a lot of time that people don't get caught, especially when they're younger, with having ADHD. Especially in those, as I was talking about earlier, with the intersectionality, especially in groups with high poverty, groups of people who are not white, especially Black and Indigenous people, are at increased risk of not being diagnosed, and then also increased risk because of their race and because of their class of doubly being sort of put into the school to prison pipeline, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But a surprising amount of people in prison have ADHD, and obviously something's wrong. So this one's a bigger question. How are we as a society failing ADHD people so that this happens? Okay, we can talk about it at the end too if anyone wants to say it, but it's just a weird stat. The school to prison pipeline. The school to prison pipeline is the idea that schools and systems fail students, or sometimes even cause students to end up in the prison system. The system mostly affects disadvantaged students, students from poverty homes, non-white students, and a lot of other things. Neurodivergency and mental illness can also interact with these other things, making children less likely to get the help that they need. This is ingrained in the structure of the school system, and not only the school system, but a lot of other systems that interact with children. And it's a very, very complex issue with a lot of cogs. If anyone wanted to talk about some of the specific issues or some of the things that we could do about those specific issues to incite change. I know one of the things that people talk about a lot is having police in schools, because police in schools will end up picking on and probably being more violent than necessary to especially children who act up in school, which is a lot of neurodivergent kids.
So, I don't know if y'all remember those weird TV shows or whatever. I don't know exactly what they are, but where they try and scare children into not wanting to go to prison by showing them
Scared Straight.
children who were in prison. What did you say?
Yeah, I think the show is called Scared Straight.
Yeah, Scared Straight.
Chambers too.
And what that show has always made me feel is that they're manipulating. They're manipulating the children who have been put into this prison by having them talk about their traumas and their struggles in prison as a almost comedic fear factor. And then you have children who the things that I think Scared Straight thinks it's scaring children out of doing are, I don't know, drugs and violence, right? I think those are the things that but the thing about prison is when children are being like uh I don't know what point I'm trying to make with this. It's just I think it's an awful thing to even start with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is fucked up. Yeah, I sort of get your point, but I also don't know how to quite articulate it. Anyone else have any comments or questions about the school to prison pipeline? Okay. Imprisonment and mental health. Kat, did you want to take this one? You don't have to, but if you'd like to.
My roommate has a new dog, and I don't know when they start barking, so I'd rather one adult do
Right,
that.
Okay, yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. So the CAP report discusses the difficulty of maintaining mental health while incarcerated. It notes that mental illness may worsen, and people without mental illness may develop it under the conditions of incarceration. This next quote is from the WHO, which is the World Health Organization. This was an incredibly good document that's listed in the sources if you guys want to go through it. But prisons are bad for mental health. There are factors in many prisons that have negative effects on mental health, including overcrowding, various forms of violence, enforced solitude or conversely lack of privacy, lack of meaningful activity, isolation from social networks, insecurity about future prospects, work relationships, etc., and inadequate health services, especially mental health services in prisons. And as we sort of covered earlier, prisons are already a place where a lot of people who are mentally ill or have other sort of neurodivergencies end up. And this sort of makes it worse. And I'm sure you guys all know with the isolation of just from the pandemic, not even an actual prison isolation, how messed up that makes you, how bad that is for you. And so prisons are sort of unethical in how they treat mental health and how they make a lot of things worse to people they should hopefully be reforming. Talk a little bit more. So there are some ideas here. There's both the ideas of prison abolition and also prison reform. Some other countries have alternative prison systems more focused on reform, including therapy, job training, creative outlets, privacy and autonomy, and all sorts of things like that, which were a lot of issues, as you can see in this quote, that current prisons, especially in America, lack. Lack of meaningful activity, giving prisoners actually something to do that is enriching and productive for them. A lot of people also call for an outright abolition of prisons and putting alternative systems into place. A recent step, there was an executive order to close for-profit prisons. And, is that a good step? Is that enough? Because obviously we have some issues with our prison system. And we're nearing the end, so if you guys have some thoughts on prison abolition or prison reform, we can sort of discuss it as we're getting further. This is just a quote that kind of struck me with how I feel about prison, so I'm just going to read it out. It's not necessarily about neurodivergency, but it definitely applies, I think. I'm convinced that imprisonment is a way of pretending to solve the problem of crime. It does nothing for the victims of crime, but perpetuates the idea of retribution, thus maintaining the endless cycle of violence in our culture. It is a cruel and useless substitute for the elimination of those conditions: poverty, unemployment, homelessness, desperation, racism, greed, which are all the roots of the most punished crime. The crimes of the rich and powerful go mostly unpunished. It must surely be a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit that even a small number of those men and women in the hell of the prison system survive it and hold on to their humanity. It's from Howard Zen. You can't be neutral on a moving train, a personal history of our times. Jaden?
This is, yep. So this is a, much like the previous slide, this is like in regards to prison abolition, this is about the fundamental role of the police. The police as an institution is fundamentally intertwined with the modern notion of the state. A state is a system of government with a monopoly on violence. The police are the enforcers of that violence. What a monopoly on violence means is essentially that the state, the police, can have the ability to enact violence in terms of, as you know, the police can arrest people, can put them in prison, can, when it comes to other situations regarding incarceration generally, and the state in general, has sort of the legal ability to use violence that is not afforded to other people. So, an example of a state would be the United States, funnily enough, and basically every other country that exists right now. Not all societies have had states. There have been there has been like some more primitive examples in the past of societies that don't really have a state with a monopoly on violence. Many Native American societies, for example, are a pretty easy example. So, um, yeah, that's essentially for the definition, which can be confusing, but if you have any questions about it, that's we'll get to that soon. Marxists claim that by its very design, the state is a tool of oppression used by a higher class against a lower class. If the working class is unhappy with the state of affairs, it wishes to forcefully change them outside of the tools of government. For example, whether with prison abolition, because the government isn't like doesn't do that. If people wish for a change in that state of affairs, the police exist to ensure that things stay the way that they are. So, in summary, the state exists to reinforce the domination of the ruling class. Police exist to protect the state. That's the fundamental critique of where, essentially police already reinforce um, systemic oppression and pre-existing biases and bigotry within society. But even without all of that, even pushing all of that aside, from a very fundamental level, the police, like the role that they play and the way that they are intertwined with the state itself, is something that cannot be reformed and reconciled with trying to get to a post-capitalist society. And as I have talked about before, capitalism very inherently ties to ableism in a way that cannot be reconciled. So that's that. If anyone has any questions about that slide, or we can get into the end discussion here.
Yeah, so these discussion questions are just things to pique your thoughts. They're not necessarily, we're not going in order, we're not discussing all of these. It's just sort of, if you have any thoughts on any of these things, feel free to speak up. So what are alternatives to policing? What are things that could help in the school system specifically? Is policing inherently ableist? Is the prison system inherently ableist? Do you have any thoughts on prison abolition or reform, justice system reform in general? And what other systems can help cause these problems? This is now free for anyone to discuss things.
and again, feel free to put your thoughts in voice if you don't feel like speaking out. Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me, but I'm just gonna say, I through looking at this presentation and other sources that I've found over time, I've come to the conclusion for myself that policing is ableist by its very existence, along with other things. I think there are enough problems with policing that any of the quote good that it does for society is null and void because of all of the harm that it can bring. And I know that there have been a ton of propositions about what to do instead, but all I can say is it just hurts. It just gets me angry to think about it, and I think we should do something about it.
So I know a lot about the prison systems and like all that stuff, and one of the, I mean, like in my class, because I'm a criminal justice major, so I like take specific classes for these things. In that class, we're learning a lot about, and he's super unbiased about all of it. Like he acknowledges that it's not that great. It's really interesting to learn about it because, and like especially watching documentaries on like actual people going through prison, they need a lot more help than what's ever given to them, and especially with more like, especially getting diagnosed with something like when you're in a court, and when you're in court and you're getting tested to see if you can plead insanity or like that sort of charge, a lot of the times that gets thrown out like automatically, which is very interesting. But basically one of the things is they've stopped using mental institutions and they use prisons like mental institutions now, which is super interesting and weird to think about. But there was this huge shift.
Or short-term emergency stays and like actual long-term ones that people actually need are super expensive and are like really hard to come by because Ronald Reagan was the actual devil.
Right. Yes. Sorry, that was my roommate. Very helpful.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking to me. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
Oh, fuck. I'm sorry.
You're good. So basically, it's weird to see that shift in what's happening now, because it definitely happened around that time, and now people are just like kind of abusing the prison system essentially, which is just really interesting to think about.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts. Was the actual devil. Mm-hmm. That's a personal thought, not the thought of ants, but you know.
I mean,
yeah, but
I never said anything. For all y'all know, I could be a huge Ronald Reagan fan. I'm not, but for all y'all could have known.
I love the idea of Texas State's only anti-Reagan club.
not a bad idea. We'll see if we can
Ant
fit that in.
spin-off club.
Yeah. I think we could change the club name to Nevermind. That wouldn't work. I'm trying to think of something we could do.
We can make a fruit salad and serve it on the quad, and it's just a bowl of ketchup, because that's the thing he did, and let's have it classified as a fruit.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you. Sorry.
I'd like to know some of your guys' thoughts on alternatives to policing, and if that is something that we should consider.
I think it's a really complicated issue, and I know I haven't done my full research, but I know there's a lot of people who have like a lot of uh, documents and stuff that you can read about like sort of their alternatives. Because obviously the current system isn't working, and a lot of that, I think, especially police are highly geared towards protecting property and not necessarily people. Um, and it is, as you're talking about with the state, like it's to protect the state's wants and needs, which don't necessarily always line up with the people who actually live there wants and needs. For me, I've always thought breaking it up into more groups, because obviously we're not going to solve all of our structural issues that cause things like crimes in one day, so it's a whole lot of backlog of we need a huge amount of social services and all sorts of other things to be able even to reduce, police. Um, there's a lot going on there. I definitely think one thing that should happen is more mental health professionals that can be called out instead of police for a lot of the issues. The problem is cities don't really necessarily want to budget for that. So that's more of like you got to pressure your cities into doing these things.
I think that the exact form that policing could, well, a replacement for policing could take, would be highly dependent on the time and the specific circumstances. Obviously, I'm not sure that giving like a 100% like this is the right way to go answer is like the best way of going about it, given that the idea of existing in a society without police as it exists today would be fairly far off. I think that the I think it's very important to understand the flaws of the police, and also incredibly importantly to understand what those flaws are, why they exist as well, because I think that like understanding the role of the police is, I believe, like incredibly, just that on its own is an incredibly important step in, and like being willing to talk to others about that is a very important step to, already getting there as much as we can.
Yeah. I have a question for the group, which is what can we specifically individually or as a group do about even just some of these issues? As I mentioned earlier, one of them is just talking to people, sharing these ideas, especially, when people are willing to excuse things because of things like race or class or neurodivergency, all sorts of ableism as well. Being able to call that out and discuss that and have an open conversation about those things. I think that's something very small that we can actually do to help influence the culture a little bit. There's also writing to your city, your senators, your representatives, and sort of discussing sort of your problems. Anybody else have any suggestions?
I think that as much as possible, try to look for ways to replace the like whatever functions like of the police that are necessary. Look for ways to replace that as much as possible, which can be a bit of a difficult step for a lot of people, obviously, and is not really for everyone. But looking for self-defense is probably something that's very important, whether that be just like physical stuff like martial arts or whatever, or also like we live in Texas, it's probably a good idea arming yourself, and getting that skill is a good thing to have, if only for self-defense. And it's worth being, establishing that kind of connection with people that you know, in a sense where you can trust each other and have each other's backs as much as possible, which, that's a little bit more of, a demanding thing, but I think it's something that's very important and worth doing.
I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't advocate for arming yourself. I think, I'm a big proponent for gun control. But that's up to discussion as well, I guess.
Yeah, that's a different topic, I guess.
I wanted to point out a couple of things that were said in chat. So Zainab said something earlier that I noticed. Oh, where was it? Decriminalization of nonviolent crimes is something that I think is a good topic to bring up, because nonviolent crimes that aren't that are like I think a good example is drug use, because outside of the ways that drug use could harm society are in ways that are already illegal themselves. So like if you are on drugs and therefore you kill someone, the killing is illegal, right? Not the and so having the drugs also be illegal is an unnecessary step, and I think that we need to encourage and obviously like drug law is a whole nother topic as well, but that I feel like is a big proponent to the prison system is the war on drugs and things like that, and so
Or the drug.
what'd you say? Someone said something. Anyway, I think a big proponent is the war on drugs, and so it's good to taking away the police officer's right to destroy someone's life because of an addiction or because of a recreational drug is something that I feel like needs to be done.
Yeah, because I think that's I agree. And a lot of the earlier, if you're paying attention, all the protest, a big cry was to defund the police, and that idea is that funding goes into other stuff, and this is also interconnected, but like especially with like addiction, should not be criminalized. It should be more of this should be taken care of by the state as a health issue. And a lot of things like that, especially as we're talking about all these mental health things, like these people do not need to be in prisons.
Well,
They need
maybe
to be,
not by the state.
well, the state is in like the state medical system, as in um, universal health care.
I mean, there's a whole nother discussion to be had on the government and how that whole beast functions, but I think Raymond said building up community and strengthening bonds between your neighbors and others in your city is the most important thing you can do to render police obsolete. And I think that if you can establish community and you can establish some sort of if you can establish some sort of accountability system that doesn't involve shooty gun powerful state people, then that is best. Also, yes, universal healthcare is a pro.
Everything's so damn interconnected.
Oh yeah, and sorry about that noise. One of my friends came in and didn't realize that I was in the middle of a meeting, so that's why that talking happened.
Okay, we're reaching 9. So we don't really have an official end time, but at least I'm gonna hop off and close the meeting. If you guys want to keep discussing, absolutely, go for it. If you guys want to just go play games with each other, you guys can also do that. Thank you for coming to today's meeting. I hope you learned a little bit, thought a little bit. And if you have thoughts later, you're like, wow, you know, I needed a day or two to process that, feel free to talk in the meetings chat later. Sort of discuss these things.
And
Hell
before you go, make sure to fill out the form for attendance. Just make sure you sign that. I'll repost it. But yeah, I hope that this was a good presentation, and it should be up on YouTube in a little bit if you didn't catch something.
Hell yeah. Good work, team.